5,000 missiles, not 5, not 50, 5,000, launched in a single night. And by the time the sun rose over the Mediterranean, one of the most fortified military complexes on Earth had ceased to exist. What happened in the early hours of May 1st, 2026, did not fit inside any war game scenario any Western strategist had ever run. The models they built, the simulations they ran, the billions they spent, none of it accounted for what Iran actually did, because what Iran did was not supposed to be possible. Not under 40 years of crippling sanctions, not without access to Western semiconductors, Western guidance systems, or Western manufacturing lines, not for a country that the intelligence community had spent decades assuring us was a decade away from real military parity. They were wrong, catastrophically, historically wrong. And the Nahal Brigade Command Center paid the price for that miscalculation in fire and smoke and the lives of the men and women stationed inside it. Here is what the footage showed, and here's what the footage could not show. The night began quietly. Israeli air defense networks were active, as they always are. Radar arrays spinning, interceptor batteries loaded, the Arrow systems, the most advanced missile defense architecture ever fielded, sitting cold and ready in their launch positions. American Patriot crews were on alert across multiple sites. Iron Dome batteries ringed the critical nodes. On paper, Israel that night was defended by the most expensive, most technologically sophisticated air defense umbrella in human history. On paper. The first wave that crossed into Israeli airspace was not ballistic missiles, it was noise. Hundreds of low observable drones and subsonic cruise missiles flooding the radar picture, forcing every radar operator to make a decision, forcing every battery commander to start spending interceptors. And they spent them. Because the doctrine said, shoot everything that looks threatening, and everything looked threatening. That was the point. Iran had studied the doctrine, Iran had war-gamed the response, Iran had built the first wave specifically to drain the magazines before the real strike arrived. When the Emad missiles came, the batteries that should have stopped them were already running low. The Arrow launchers that should have engaged them at altitude had burned through their ready rounds. And 5,000 maneuvering warheads coming in at Mach 13 do not wait for resupply convoys. The Nahal Brigade headquarters took dozens of direct hits in the first minutes of the main barrage. Not near misses, not structural shaking from proximity blasts. Direct hits multiple times over from warheads carrying 750 kilograms of high explosive delivered at hypersonic terminal velocity. The underground bunkers that were supposed to protect command personnel collapsed. The hardened communication infrastructure that was supposed to survive anything went silent. The air assets parked on the adjacent base, F-35s, F-15s, Apache gunships, were caught on the ground. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed or rendered permanently inoperable, not in aerial combat, but sitting still, because no one had dispersed them in time, because no one had believed the threat was this large, this coordinated, or this precise. 12 major fuel and ammunition depots detonated in chain reactions. The secondary explosions from those depots went on for hours. Tens of thousands of tons of jet fuel, artillery shells, precision-guided munitions, all of it gone. Supply chains for the entire Southern Command were severed in a single night. Radar installations at 6 key sites went dark. The blind spots created by those destroyed systems will take months to repair, and in a conflict that is still developing, months might as well be forever. The casualty figures that emerged in the hours after the strike shook every military institution that heard them. Hundreds of IDF soldiers and officers killed in the initial barrage. Thousands more wounded. Senior officers who had spent careers building Israel's southern command capacity were among the dead. Entire unit structures were decapitated, the institutional knowledge lost in that one night cannot be rebuilt quickly. You can replace equipment with money. You cannot replace experienced commanders and trained personnel on any timeline that matters in an active conflict. Now let us talk about the weapon itself, because understanding the Emad is understanding why this outcome was always more possible than anyone in Washington or Tel Aviv wanted to admit. The Emad is a medium-range ballistic missile, maximum range around 1,700 kilometers, warhead payload of 750 kilograms. But the number that matters most is not range or payload. The number that matters is the cost per unit. Iran fields this missile at somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 per round. The Arrow 3 interceptor designed to kill it costs between $2 and $4 million. The Patriot PAC-3 costs more than $4 million per missile. That gap is not a detail. That gap is the entire strategic logic of what Iran executed on May 1st. Iran did not need every missile to get through. It needed enough of them to get through after the defenders had exhausted their budget. The math is ruthless and simple. For every 10 intercepts, Israel and the United States spent $40 million. Iran spent $5 million. Run that equation across 5,000 incoming missiles, and you are not watching a battle. You are watching a controlled demolition of an economic model. Iran forced its adversaries into exactly the war of attrition it had prepared for, and they had not. The Emad's maneuverable re-entry vehicle made terminal intercept even harder than the numbers suggest. During the final phase of flight, as the warhead descends toward its target, it executes high-G evasive maneuvers that kinetic interceptors struggle to match. An interceptor missile designed to collide with a predictable trajectory faces a fundamentally different problem when the target can jink at hypersonic speed. Some percentage of those 5,000 missiles would have been stopped even in a perfect defense, but the combination of saturation numbers, economic attrition, and maneuvering warheads ensured that the percentage getting through was large enough to cause catastrophic damage at every priority target. What makes this harder to dismiss as a one-time anomaly is how Iran built this capability. Not with foreign components, not with smuggled Western technology, with domestic engineering developed over decades, specifically because sanctions removed every other option. Iranian missile engineers had no access to the global defense industrial supply chain, so they built their own. Composite materials, guidance electronics, propulsion systems, re-entry vehicle aerodynamics, all of it developed domestically under the pressure of isolation. The sanctions that were supposed to freeze Iran's program instead created a self-sufficient defense industry that answers to no foreign supplier and cannot be shut down by any embargo. That is the outcome no sanctions architect planned for. Pressure without a viable off-ramp does not always produce capitulation. Sometimes it produces exactly the adversary you were trying to prevent. Washington's response to the strike was the second shock of the week. The language was strong. The carrier deployments were real. 3 strike groups moved toward the eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. B-52 crews were placed on elevated alert. Every official statement promised consequences. And then the strikes that everyone expected did not come. Not against Iranian territory, not against the launch sites, not against the command infrastructure that had just obliterated an Allied military headquarters. The superpower that had underwritten Israeli security for decades watched the fires burn and did not respond with kinetic force. This restraint was not cowardice, it was calculation, and the calculation revealed something important about where American power actually sits in 2026. A direct strike on Iranian territory carried risks the administration judged too high. Iranian proxies positioned across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen could activate simultaneously against American bases throughout the region. American forces in those locations were already within range of Iranian missile systems. The price of escalation was not a clean exchange of airstrikes. It was potentially a region-wide war fought simultaneously on 6 fronts against adversaries who had been preparing for exactly that scenario for years. There was also the economic dimension. Oil markets spiked more than 40% within hours of the strike becoming public. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant fraction of the world's seaborne oil supply passes, was now explicitly in play as a potential choke point. Any direct American military action against Iran that prompted a Hormuz closure would detonate a global energy crisis on top of an already fragile economic environment. The political cost of fuel prices doubling, of inflation surging again, of supply chains fracturing, was a variable the White House could not ignore. What emerged instead was a posture of contained deterrence, public strength, private de-escalation, back channels opened through intermediaries. The message sent was not the message delivered publicly. And America's allies around the world watching this updated their models of what American security guarantees actually mean when the cost of honoring them grows high enough. That is the deeper damage of what happened on May 1st. It is not only the burning aircraft and collapsed bunkers in Israel, it is the recalculation happening in every capital that has based its security architecture on American commitment. In Seoul, in Warsaw, in Taipei. Every defense planner in every allied nation is running a version of the same question right now. If the most visible, most long-standing American security relationship in the world reached a visible ceiling on the night of May 1st, where is our ceiling? Russia's response to the crisis was strategic patience expressed as quiet support. Moscow had no interest in inserting itself visibly into the conflict, but every interest in watching American attention and resources flow toward the Middle East while the European theater remained active. Every dollar spent on Israeli resupply is a dollar not in Ukrainian ammunition. Every American political conversation dominated by this crisis is a conversation not focused on NATO force posture. The strategic windfall for Moscow required no Russian action at all. China's response was subtler and more purposeful. Beijing positioned itself as a potential mediator, offering calm in contrast to what it framed as American volatility. Gulf states watching the crisis evolved their assessments of which great power could actually deliver stability in their neighborhood. Energy deals, infrastructure conversations, and quiet diplomatic signals moved beneath the surface of the public crisis. China does not win this moment by fighting. It wins by being the country that did not fight. The harder question underneath all of this is about the structure of the coming years. May 1st did not create the multipolar world. It made it undeniable. The trends were already there. The economic rise of the non-Western world, the spread of precision strike capability beyond the traditional defense industrial nations, the declining marginal return on expensive platform-centric military systems against adversaries who had studied their vulnerabilities for decades and built asymmetric counters specifically designed to exploit them. What May 1st did was crystallize all of those trends into a single undeniable night that will anchor strategic analysis for a generation. The lesson that every military planner will take from this is not simply that Iran has good missiles. The lesson is that the economic logic of modern air defense has a hard ceiling, and an adversary that understands that ceiling and builds its arsenal around exploiting it has a structural advantage that technology alone cannot overcome. The United States and Israel will invest further in faster interceptors, in directed energy, in new sensor architectures. Some of those investments will yield real capability. But the adversary will also adapt. The cycle that began on May 1st is not a problem with a clean solution. It is a permanent feature of the military competition now underway. What remains unresolved as of this moment is everything that matters most. Whether Iran reads American restraint as an invitation to further pressure or as a signal that de-escalation is available, whether Israel's government can survive the domestic political consequences of a military catastrophe of this scale, whether the back-channel conversations now underway produce anything other than a temporary pause before the next escalation. And what the next escalation looks like if it comes, because if Iran demonstrated on May 1st what a single coordinated strike can accomplish, the question of what a sustained campaign looks like is one that no one in any relevant government wants to answer out loud. The fires over the Nahal Brigade complex have changed the baseline, not as propaganda, not as perception, as a physical, measurable, documented fact. Hundreds of millions of dollars in air assets are wreckage. Command infrastructure built over years is rubble. Air defense magazines are depleted and replenishment takes months. The military balance in the region on May 2nd is materially different from the military balance on April 30th, and no statement from any capital changes that physical reality. The world that existed before May 1st still had contested questions. Which defense systems could hold against a saturated attack? Whether the Emad's maneuvering warhead was as capable as Iranian engineers claimed? Whether American deterrence would hold against a direct strike on an ally? Those questions are no longer contested. They have been answered, and the answers will shape every decision made in this region, and in Washington, and in every capital watching from outside for years to come. The age of certainty is over. What replaces it is still being written, and the ink is not yet dry.